Hello and welcome. Today, I'm going to whisper to you about one of the most remarkable figures of ancient Egypt, Queen Hatshepsut. So, get comfortable, relax, and let's embark on a journey to the distant past, where a woman rose to power and ruled an empire that left its mark on history. Hatshepsut, a name that echoes through time, was not just any pharaoh. She was a queen who dared to challenge tradition, claiming her place as Egypt's ruler at a time when women rarely held such authority. Her story is one of strength, wisdom, and resilience as she navigated the complex world of politics and power in ancient Egypt. Tonight, we will delve into her life, her reign, and the legacy she left behind. Close your eyes and imagine the golden sands of Egypt, the towering temples, and the timeless Nile River, all under the watchful eye of a queen who defied expectations and led her people with grace and determination. Are you ready to discover the secrets of Hatshepsut, the queen who became a pharaoh? Let's begin. Hatshepsut's birth and royal family. Hatshepsut was born around 1507 BCE into the prestigious 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, a time when the Egyptian empire was at its height. Her father, Thutmose I, was a revered pharaoh who had expanded Egypt's reach far into Nubia in the south and had established the kingdom's influence across the Near East. Thutmose I was not a direct royal lineage, having been a skilled military commander who rose to power through his achievements on the battlefield and in governing. However, by marrying Almos, a queen of royal blood, he cemented his legitimacy as pharaoh and strengthened the ties between military prowess and royal lineage in Egypt. Hatshepsut's mother, Queen Almos, was a key figure in the royal family. She came from a powerful line of queens, many of whom had been instrumental in maintaining the divine rule of the pharaohs. Almos was deeply involved in religious and ceremonial life, reinforcing the divine connection between the gods and the ruling family, a role that Hatshepsut herself would later take on. Growing up under Almos' care, Hatshepsut was exposed early on to the religious duties and expectations of Egyptian royalty, including temple rituals and the careful management of the kingdom's wealth and resources. From her earliest days, Hatshepsut was surrounded by the grandeur of the royal court in Thebes, which was Egypt's spiritual and political heart. Thebes, with its towering temples and monuments to the gods, was a place where power, religion, and architecture intertwined to project the strength of the pharaoh. The royal palace was located near the temple complex of Karnak, where priests performed rituals to honor the gods, and this proximity to both secular and sacred spaces shaped young Hatshepsut's view of leadership. She witnessed her father commanding armies and diplomats, while her mother presided over important religious ceremonies, ingraining in her a deep understanding of the dual roles of a pharaoh, as both a ruler and a divine representative of the gods. Hatshepsut's education was unlike that of many Egyptian women of her time. As the daughter of a powerful king, she received training that prepared her for significant responsibility. She was taught to read and write, a rare skill for women in ancient Egypt, and was likely educated in hieroglyphics, mathematics, and history. In addition to her academic learning, Hatshepsut was trained in diplomacy and statecraft. She observed how her father negotiated with foreign emissaries and managed Egypt's vast economy, which relied heavily on agriculture, trade, and tribute from conquered lands. One of the most defining aspects of Hatshepsut's upbringing was her connection to the religious life of Egypt. The pharaoh was not merely a political leader, but also a living god on earth, the intermediary between the gods and the people. Hatshepsut's family belonged to a tradition that believed their right to rule was divinely ordained, and she was raised to view herself as part of this sacred lineage. Egyptian religion held that the gods controlled the natural world, and the pharaoh's role was to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order and balance, ensuring the prosperity of the land and the people. Even as a child, Hatshepsut would have been involved in key ceremonies, participating in religious rituals and observing the reverence with which her family was treated by the priests and people. This experience would deeply influence her later decisions as pharaoh, when she would emphasize her divine birth and connection to the gods to justify her unprecedented reign as a female ruler in a male-dominated world. Hatshepsut's early life was also marked by a keen awareness of Egypt's military strength. She watched her father, Thutmose I, lead military campaigns that expanded the borders of Egypt, particularly in Nubia and the Levant. These campaigns brought great wealth to the kingdom in the form of gold, precious materials, and captives. Hatshepsut grew up in an era where military conquest and the pharaoh's divine authority were closely linked. Her father's ability to lead in both war and peace became a model for her own leadership, even though she would eventually choose diplomacy and trade over warfare during her reign. As the eldest daughter of Thutmose I, Hatshepsut was well positioned within the royal family, but her future was still uncertain. At the time of her birth, the Egyptian throne traditionally passed to male heirs, and there was little precedent for women taking on the full powers of Pharaoh. Nonetheless, Hatshepsut's upbringing ensured that she was far more than a passive figure in the court. Her intelligence, education, and exposure to the levers of power prepared her for a future where she would step far beyond the conventional role of a queen. Despite the limitations placed on women in ancient Egypt, Hatshepsut's lineage, education, and character set her apart. She was born into a dynasty that held both military strength and religious authority, and these influences would shape her path to becoming one of the most extraordinary rulers in Egyptian history. Her understanding of politics, religion, and Egypt's vast empire would serve her well as she navigated the complexities of the royal court and eventually ascended to a role that no one could have foreseen for her. Youth and becoming queen. As Hatshepsut grew older, her role within the royal family began to take shape. In ancient Egypt, royal women often held significant influence, but their primary function was to secure the royal bloodline by marrying into the family and producing heirs. Hatshepsut was no exception, and her path to power began when she married her half-brother, Thutmose II. This marriage, though customary in the royal family to preserve bloodlines, would mark the beginning of Hatshepsut's ascent in Egyptian politics. Thutmose II was the son of Thutmose I and a lesser wife, Mutnofret, making him a half-brother to Hatshepsut. The exact age of Hatshepsut at the time of their marriage is not certain, but it is believed she was in her late teens, while Thutmose II was around the same age. Although their marriage was more political than romantic, it solidified Hatshepsut's position as the highest-ranking woman in the kingdom. She became the Great Royal Wife, the most prestigious title a queen could hold, which also gave her a considerable amount of influence within the royal court. Thutmose II's reign was relatively short and uneventful compared to that of his father, Thutmose I. He is often considered a weaker ruler, more overshadowed by his father's achievements than distinguished in his own right. Unlike his father, who was known for military conquests and strengthening Egypt's borders, Thutmose II's reign was marked by relative peace. There were minor military campaigns, including a suppression of a rebellion in Nubia, but nothing on the scale of his predecessor's triumphs. It is believed that much of the political power during this time was actually exercised by the experienced courtiers and priests who had served Thutmose I. During Thutmose II's reign, Hatshepsut's influence began to grow. As a great royal wife, she was involved in important religious rituals and state affairs. She served as a powerful intermediary between her husband and the temples, particularly in Thebes, where her family had strong ties to the priesthood of Ammonius. Hatshepsut was particularly devoted to the god Ammonius, whose influence in Thebes was central to the religious life of the city. Her devotion to Ammonius and her involvement in temple activities strengthened her connection to the divine, a connection she would later use to legitimize her own reign. Though their marriage produced no male heirs, Hatshepsut and Thutmose II had a daughter, Neferur. Hatshepsut took great care in her daughter's upbringing, involving her in the religious and political life of the royal family from a young age. Neferur was often depicted in royal art alongside her mother, and there are indications that Hatshepsut intended her daughter to play a significant role in the court, perhaps even as a co-ruler or a future queen. Neferur's prominent position in the royal family is a testament to the importance Hatshepsut placed on female leadership, even though the traditional role for women in ancient Egypt was still primarily that of wife and mother. Thutmose II's reign lasted only about 13 years before he died unexpectedly, likely in his early 30s. His death created a power vacuum in the royal court, as his only son and designated heir, Thutmose III, was still a child. This set the stage for one of the most remarkable transitions of power in Egyptian history. Thutmose III was born to one of Thutmose II's secondary wives, Iset, making him the legitimate heir, but too young to rule on his own. At this critical juncture, Hatshepsut stepped forward to take control of the situation. As the widow of the deceased pharaoh and the stepmother of the young Thutmose III, she was ideally positioned to assume the role of regent. In ancient Egypt, it was not uncommon for queens or royal mothers to act as regents for young kings, overseeing the administration of the kingdom until the heir came of age. However, what happened next was unprecedented. As regent, Hatshepsut initially presented herself as a caretaker for her stepson, handling the daily affairs of the kingdom while he grew older. Yet, over time, her role expanded beyond that of a traditional regent. Hatshepsut's charisma, intelligence, and connections within the royal court and priesthood allowed her to gradually consolidate power. She appointed trusted officials, many of whom had served her father, to key positions within the government, ensuring that her authority was respected across Egypt. One of the most crucial steps in Hatshepsut's rise to power was her strategic use of religion. As the royal widow and great royal wife, she already had significant influence within the religious hierarchy, particularly in Thebes, the religious capital of Egypt. Hatshepsut strengthened her ties with the powerful priesthood of Ammonius, the most important religious institution in Egypt. The priests of Ammonius were central to legitimizing pharaonic authority, as they controlled many of the religious rituals that affirmed the pharaoh's divine right to rule. By aligning herself closely with this priesthood, Hatshepsut positioned herself as a ruler chosen by the gods, a narrative that she would later fully develop when she declared herself pharaoh. During her regency, Hatshepsut also began to take on more of the symbols and titles associated with pharaonic power. In official artwork and inscriptions, she was increasingly depicted as a ruler in her own right, often in the traditional male garb of a pharaoh, including the false beard, a symbol of kingship. This gradual shift in her public image set the stage for what would be one of the most audacious moves in Egyptian history, Hatshepsut's decision to declare herself pharaoh. But before this declaration, Hatshepsut had already proven herself as an astute and capable ruler. She had navigated the complex politics of the court, secured the loyalty of key officials, and maintained the stability of Egypt during a potentially vulnerable time. The death of Thutmose II and the Regency period. The death of Thutmose II marked a significant turning point in the life of Hatshepsut, both personally and politically. After ruling Egypt for about 13 years, Thutmose II died unexpectedly, likely due to illness, leaving behind a young son, Thutmose III, as his heir. However, at the time of his father's death, Thutmose III was still a child, likely no more than 3 or 4 years old. This left Egypt without a fully mature and capable ruler, creating a power vacuum that Hatshepsut was quick to fill. As the widow of the deceased king and the stepmother of the young heir, Hatshepsut was in a unique position to assume the role of regent. In ancient Egyptian tradition, when a king died and his heir was too young to rule, the queen mother or another close relative would often step in as regent to manage the affairs of state until the heir came of age. This was not an uncommon arrangement, and Hatshepsut's appointment as regent was initially seen as a temporary solution meant to ensure the smooth running of the kingdom until Thutmose III was old enough to take the throne. At the beginning of her regency, Hatshepsut's role appeared to be a conventional one. She took on the responsibilities of governing Egypt on behalf of her stepson, overseeing the administration of the kingdom, managing the royal treasury, and maintaining Egypt's military and foreign relations. In this role, she was essentially a caretaker of the throne, ensuring that Egypt remained stable and prosperous during a potentially vulnerable time. However, Hatshepsut was no ordinary regent. From the very beginning of her regency, she displayed remarkable skill and determination in consolidating her power. She surrounded herself with loyal and capable officials who had served her father and husband, many of whom recognized her intelligence and leadership abilities. One of the key figures in her inner circle was Senenmut, an architect and advisor who would later play a crucial role in many of Hatshepsut's ambitious building projects. With the support of these trusted advisors, Hatshepsut was able to effectively manage the affairs of the kingdom and establish herself as a capable leader in her own right. As regent, Hatshepsut was responsible for maintaining Egypt's internal stability, which was no small task. Egypt was a vast and diverse empire, with territories stretching from the southern reaches of Nubia to the eastern Mediterranean coast. The empire's economy relied on a complex system of taxation, agriculture, and trade, all of which needed careful management to ensure the continued prosperity of the kingdom. Hatshepsut's regency was marked by a focus on maintaining the economic and social stability of Egypt, which she accomplished with remarkable success. One of the most important aspects of Hatshepsut's regency was her relationship with the powerful priesthood of Ammonius. The priests of Ammonius held immense influence in Thebes, Egypt's religious capital, and their support was crucial for any ruler seeking to legitimize their authority. Hatshepsut, who had long been a devotee of the god Ammonius, cultivated a close relationship with the priesthood, reinforcing her position as the regent of Egypt. This alliance with the religious establishment would later prove to be a key factor in Hatshepsut's ability to proclaim herself pharaoh. While Hatshepsut outwardly presented herself as the loyal regent of young Thutmose III, she was quietly building a power base that would allow her to eventually claim the throne for herself. Over time, she began to take on more of the symbols and responsibilities of pharaonic power, including making important decisions regarding foreign policy and military campaigns. Under her regency, Egypt remained peaceful and stable, with no major conflicts or uprisings threatening the kingdom's security. As the years passed, it became clear that Hatshepsut's ambitions extended far beyond the traditional role of regent. Instead of stepping aside when Thutmose III reached an appropriate age to rule, Hatshepsut began to position herself as the rightful ruler of Egypt. In official inscriptions, she emphasized her connection to the divine, claiming that the god Ammonius had chosen her to rule over Egypt. This divine endorsement would later form the foundation of her justification for taking the throne as pharaoh. The transition from regent to ruler was not immediate, but Hatshepsut's gradual accumulation of power laid the groundwork for her eventual declaration as pharaoh. By the time Thutmose III was old enough to assume the throne, Hatshepsut had already established herself as the de facto ruler of Egypt, with the full support of the priesthood, the royal court, and the military. The next step in her remarkable journey would be to take the unprecedented step of proclaiming herself pharaoh, a bold move that would challenge the traditional gender norms of ancient Egypt and forever change the course of history. Proclaiming herself pharaoh. Hatshepsut's decision to declare herself pharaoh was nothing short of revolutionary. In ancient Egypt, pharaonic power was almost exclusively held by men, and the role of a female ruler was typically limited to that of a regent or queen consort. However, Hatshepsut was determined to break from tradition and assert her authority as the sole ruler of Egypt. This audacious move would make her one of the most extraordinary figures in ancient Egyptian history. After several years of acting as regent for the young Thutmose III, Hatshepsut began to take on the full mantle of power. What started as a temporary position gradually transformed into something far more permanent. Hatshepsut had already accumulated significant influence as regent, carefully managing the affairs of state, maintaining peace, and ensuring economic stability. But instead of stepping aside once Thutmose III was of age to rule, she sought to consolidate her power even further. The process of Hatshepsut's elevation to pharaoh was a carefully orchestrated and gradual one. Rather than making an abrupt declaration, Hatshepsut slowly began to take on more and more of the symbols of kingship. She adopted the full titulary of a pharaoh, which included 5 royal names that signified her divine and earthly authority. These names were inscribed on monuments, statues, and official documents, proclaiming her role as the legitimate ruler of Egypt. A crucial element of Hatshepsut's strategy was her use of religious imagery and ideology to justify her rule. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not only a political leader but also a divine figure chosen by the gods to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order. Hatshepsut claimed that she had been divinely selected by the god Ammonius to rule Egypt. In temple inscriptions, she emphasized her connection to Ammonius, portraying herself as the daughter of the god, conceived through a divine birth. This powerful narrative, which positioned her as the chosen one of the gods, was crucial in legitimizing her unprecedented claim to the throne. One of the most famous depictions of this divine relationship is found in her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. In the temple's reliefs, Hatshepsut is shown being conceived by her mother, Queen Almos, and the god Ammonius. These scenes not only emphasize her divine right to rule but also serve as a powerful propaganda tool, reinforcing the idea that her reign was sanctioned by the gods themselves. In addition to claiming divine favor, Hatshepsut also made strategic use of the visual symbols of pharaonic power. She began to be depicted in the traditional male attire of a pharaoh, including the false beard, the Nemes headdress, and the Shenda kilt. In some depictions, she appeared with a more feminine figure, while in others, she was portrayed in a fully masculine form. These dual representations allowed her to navigate the gender expectations of the time, presenting herself as both a legitimate king and as a female ruler. By adopting the visual language of kingship, Hatshepsut was able to project authority and power even in a male-dominated society. Hatshepsut's decision to take the throne did not mean that Thutmose III was entirely removed from power. In fact, she continued to present him as her co-regent, though in practice, it was Hatshepsut who held the reins of government. This arrangement allowed her to maintain a semblance of continuity and stability, ensuring that there was no outright rebellion or challenge to her authority. Thutmose III, still a young boy, was largely a figurehead during this period, while Hatshepsut wielded true power. The coronation of Hatshepsut as pharaoh was a carefully planned and symbolic event. It involved elaborate religious ceremonies, where the priesthood of Ammonius played a central role in legitimizing her rule. By aligning herself so closely with the religious establishment, Hatshepsut ensured that her ascent to the throne was seen as not only acceptable but divinely ordained. The priesthood, which held considerable influence over both the people and the administration, provided her with the necessary backing to take the unprecedented step of declaring herself pharaoh. The inscriptions and records from this time reflect Hatshepsut's growing confidence as ruler. She declared herself Matkir, meaning truth is the soul of Ra, a name that reflected her belief in her divine role as the maintainer of order and justice in the universe. In official documents, she referred to herself as the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, fully embracing the masculine titles traditionally associated with the pharaoh. Hatshepsut's reign as pharaoh was not without its challenges. It was likely that there were those within the court who were uneasy about a woman occupying the throne, particularly given the long tradition of male pharaohs. However, Hatshepsut's ability to consolidate power, her careful cultivation of religious legitimacy, and her shrewd political maneuvering allowed her to successfully maintain control over Egypt for more than 2 decades. Hatshepsut's decision to declare herself pharaoh was not only a bold political move but also a deeply symbolic one. By breaking with tradition and assuming the title of king, she redefined what it meant to rule Egypt. Her reign would be marked by a period of great prosperity, monumental building projects, and successful foreign relations. But this moment, when she proclaimed herself pharaoh, stands as one of the most remarkable acts of leadership in the history of ancient Egypt, setting her apart as one of the most influential women to ever rule. The early years of Hatshepsut's reign as pharaoh. Once Hatshepsut firmly established herself as pharaoh, her focus shifted to ensuring the stability and prosperity of her kingdom. The early years of her reign were characterized by careful governance and a focus on maintaining internal peace and economic growth. Although Hatshepsut's rise to power was unprecedented, she quickly demonstrated that she was more than capable of leading Egypt, and her reign soon became a model of effective and stable rule. Hatshepsut's initial priorities as pharaoh were focused on stabilizing the kingdom after the transition of power. Egypt was a vast and complex empire, and maintaining control over its territories required careful administration. Hatshepsut had inherited a peaceful and prosperous Egypt, thanks in part to her father, Thutmose I, and her regency during the early years of Thutmose III's life. However, she understood that her authority as a female pharaoh was still somewhat precarious, and she worked diligently to ensure that her rule was not challenged. One of Hatshepsut's first actions as pharaoh was to strengthen her relationships with the powerful nobility and priesthood. Many of the officials who had served during her father's reign continued to hold important positions in her government, providing her with a network of loyal and experienced advisors. These officials, such as Senenmut, her trusted advisor and architect, play key roles in maintaining the stability of her regime. By surrounding herself with competent and loyal officials, Hatshepsut was able to consolidate her power and ensure that her reign would be free from internal strife. Religious legitimacy continued to be a central theme in Hatshepsut's rule. Having already established herself as the chosen daughter of Ammonius, Hatshepsut made it a priority to maintain close ties with the temples and priesthoods, particularly the powerful priesthood of Ammonius in Thebes. Religious ceremonies and offerings were a regular part of her governance as they reaffirmed her divine right to rule. The support of the priesthood was essential for maintaining the loyalty of the population, as the priests were seen as the intermediaries between the gods and the people. Hatshepsut's ability to maintain the favor of the gods was seen as crucial for ensuring Egypt's prosperity and stability. Economically, Hatshepsut's early reign was marked by a focus on rebuilding and enhancing Egypt's infrastructure. While Egypt's economy was already thriving, Hatshepsut sought to further increase the kingdom's wealth through investment in agriculture, trade, and monumental building projects. The Nile River, Egypt's lifeblood, remained central to the economy, and Hatshepsut worked to ensure that its annual floods, which provided the fertile soil needed for agriculture, were carefully managed. By overseeing the construction of irrigation systems and ensuring the proper distribution of grain, Hatshepsut helped to secure Egypt's food supply, which was vital for both the stability of the state and the well-being of the population. In addition to agriculture, trade played a critical role in Hatshepsut's economic policies. Egypt's position along the Nile River and its access to the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea made it a key hub for trade between Africa, the Near East, and the Mediterranean world. Hatshepsut was keenly aware of the importance of maintaining and expanding Egypt's trade networks, and her early reign saw the revitalization of key trading routes. This would culminate in her famous expedition to the Land of Punt, a prosperous trading partner that brought wealth and exotic goods to Egypt, but that success would come a bit later in her reign. Hatshepsut's attention to detail in governance extended to the judiciary and administration as well. Inscriptions from this period suggest that she was deeply involved in the day-to-day management of the kingdom, taking a hands-on approach to resolving disputes and overseeing the administration of justice. While Egypt had a well-established system of law and governance, Hatshepsut's active participation in these processes helped to further legitimize her rule. Her involvement in legal matters also reinforced her role as the protector of Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian concept of balance and justice, which was central to the legitimacy of the pharaoh's rule. Hatshepsut's ability to maintain peace and prosperity in the early years of her reign was crucial for establishing the long-term success of her rule. While she faced challenges from those who may have been skeptical of a female pharaoh, she managed to overcome these obstacles through careful governance, religious legitimacy, and the loyalty of her key advisors. Hatshepsut's early reign laid the foundation for the period of remarkable stability and growth that would characterize her entire time as pharaoh. By the time Hatshepsut had firmly established herself on the throne, Egypt was in a position of strength, both economically and politically. Her reign had started on solid ground, with no major military conflicts or internal uprisings to threaten her power. This period of peace allowed Hatshepsut to focus on more ambitious projects, particularly in the realms of architecture and foreign trade, which would define the next phase of her reign. Revolutionary building projects. One of the hallmarks of Hatshepsut's reign was her ambitious and groundbreaking building projects. As a ruler who sought not only to legitimize her authority but also to leave a lasting legacy, Hatshepsut embarked on some of the most impressive architectural ventures in ancient Egyptian history. Her reign is often remembered for the grandeur of her constructions, which not only reflected her power but also served to solidify her connection to the divine. Perhaps the most famous of all her projects was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, which remains one of the most iconic structures of ancient Egypt. Located in the desert cliffs on the west bank of the Nile, near the Valley of the Kings, the temple was dedicated to Ammonius, but it also celebrated Hatshepsut's divine birth and her reign as pharaoh. The structure was designed by her trusted architect Senenmut, who created a unique and stunning masterpiece that blended harmoniously with the natural surroundings. The temple at Deir el-Bahari, known as Djeser, or Holy of Holies, was unlike any temple built before it. Instead of the traditional solid and closed design of previous temples, Hatshepsut's mortuary temple was open and terraced, with multiple levels connected by grand ramps and colonnades. The terraces were adorned with statues, trees, and gardens, symbolizing the fertility and prosperity that Hatshepsut's reign brought to Egypt. The temple also featured stunning reliefs depicting key moments in her life and reign, including her divine birth and the famous expedition to Punt. The reliefs inside the temple served both religious and political purposes. On one level, they emphasized Hatshepsut's connection to the gods, particularly Ammonius, portraying her as the daughter of the god and the rightful ruler of Egypt. The scenes of her divine birth reinforced the idea that her ascent to the throne was ordained by the gods and that she was chosen to rule. These images were vital for maintaining the religious legitimacy of her reign, as they presented her as a divinely sanctioned leader in the eyes of the Egyptian people and priesthood. The Deir el-Bahari temple also featured images of Hatshepsut's successful trade expedition to Punt, a distant and mysterious land that had long been a source of wealth for Egypt. The reliefs show the Egyptian ships sailing to Punt, laden with gold, ivory, incense, exotic animals, and other valuable goods. This expedition, which will be discussed in greater detail later, was a significant achievement of Hatshepsut's reign and a symbol of Egypt's wealth and influence during her time as pharaoh. But Deir el-Bahari was just one of many projects undertaken during Hatshepsut's reign. She also commissioned numerous other temples, statues, and monuments throughout Egypt, all designed to leave a lasting mark on the landscape and to immortalize her reign. Hatshepsut's building projects were not only about grandiosity, they also served practical and religious purposes, reinforcing her legitimacy and ensuring that her memory would be preserved long after her death. In Thebes, the religious heart of Egypt, Hatshepsut invested heavily in the Temple of Karnak, one of the most important religious sites in the kingdom. She built many chapels, pylons, and obelisks to honor Ammonius, solidifying her relationship with the powerful priesthood that controlled the temple. The two obelisks she erected at Karnak were among the tallest ever built in Egypt, standing as symbols of her divine power and connection to the gods. One of these obelisks, which still stands today, was originally covered in gold at its tip, catching the sunlight and reflecting the brilliance of her reign. The obelisks themselves were feats of engineering. Carved from a single piece of stone, they were transported from quarries in Aswan and erected in Thebes in elaborate ceremonies that emphasized Hatshepsut's strength as a ruler. Inscriptions on the obelisks glorified her reign, stating that they were erected in a short time and with the help of the god Ammonius, once again linking her rule to divine will. The obelisks not only served as religious symbols but also acted as markers of Hatshepsut's power, towering over the temple complex and reminding all who entered of her legacy. Hatshepsut's architectural achievements extended beyond temples and obelisks. She also commissioned the construction of roads, monuments, and statues throughout Egypt, many of which featured her likeness in both male and female forms. Her statues often depicted her in the traditional garb of a pharaoh, complete with a false beard and Neem's headdress, but others showed her as a woman, emphasizing her unique role as a female ruler in a male-dominated society. These statues, like her temples and obelisks, were part of a broader strategy to ensure that her reign would be remembered for generations. In many ways, Hatshepsut's building projects were designed not only for her own time but also for the future, ensuring that her legacy as a powerful and legitimate ruler would be immortalized in stone. Hatshepsut's reign as a builder king placed her among the greatest pharaohs of Egypt. Her constructions left an indelible mark on the landscape of ancient Egypt, and many of her monuments survived long after her death, despite attempts to erase her from history. Through her temples, obelisks, and statues, Hatshepsut ensured that her reign would not be forgotten, and her architectural legacy stands as a testament to her vision and power. The expedition to Punt and trade successes. One of the most celebrated achievements of Hatshepsut's reign was her ambitious trading expedition to the distant land of Punt, a mysterious and wealthy region located somewhere along the Red Sea, likely in what is now modern-day Eritrea or Somalia. This expedition was a monumental success and is immortalized in the stunning reliefs at Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. It showcased Hatshepsut's skillful leadership in diplomacy, trade, and economic growth, highlighting her ability to secure wealth and resources for Egypt without engaging in military conquest. The Land of Punt had long been a coveted trading partner of Egypt, known for its abundance of luxury goods that were highly sought after in the Egyptian markets. These goods included gold, myrrh, frankincense, ivory, ebony, exotic animals, and rare trees. Punt was viewed by the Egyptians as a land of plenty, a place of almost mythical wealth, and successful trade with Punt could bring enormous prosperity to Egypt. However, direct contact with Punt had waned in the years prior to Hatshepsut's reign, and re-establishing this connection was one of her major goals. Hatshepsut's decision to launch the expedition to Punt was both a strategic and symbolic one. At the time, Egypt was enjoying internal stability and economic prosperity, thanks in large part to Hatshepsut's careful governance. However, instead of focusing on military campaigns to expand Egypt's borders, as many of her predecessors had done, Hatshepsut turned her attention to diplomacy and trade. The expedition to Punt was a perfect example of her approach to foreign policy, which emphasized economic development and peaceful relations over war and conquest. The expedition itself was a grand undertaking, involving the construction of a fleet of ships capable of making the long journey across the Red Sea. These ships were specially built for the voyage, and Hatshepsut spared no expense in ensuring that they were equipped to handle the dangerous waters and return with the wealth of Punt. The ships were likely manned by experienced sailors and officials, all of whom were tasked with negotiating trade deals and securing valuable goods for Egypt. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahari provide a vivid account of the expedition, offering a detailed glimpse into the journey and its outcomes. In these depictions, the Egyptian fleet is shown sailing to Punt, laden with treasures and goods. The reliefs also show the Egyptians interacting with the people of Punt, who are depicted as welcoming and willing to trade. The exchange of goods is prominently featured, with the Egyptians receiving gold, ivory, myrrh trees, and other valuable commodities in return for their own goods. One of the most significant outcomes of the expedition was the acquisition of myrrh trees, which were transplanted to Egypt and planted in the gardens of Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. These trees were a symbol of wealth and fertility, and their presence in Egypt was a testament to the success of the expedition. Myrrh, a resin used in religious ceremonies and embalming practices, was one of the most precious commodities in the ancient world, and the ability to cultivate it in Egypt was a major achievement. In addition to myrrh, the expedition brought back a wealth of other luxury items, including perfumes, incense, exotic animals such as baboons, and precious woods. These goods not only enriched Egypt's economy but also enhanced Hatshepsut's prestige as a ruler. The Punt expedition was a demonstration of Egypt's far-reaching influence and Hatshepsut's ability to secure resources that were essential for the religious and economic life of the kingdom. The successful expedition to Punt was not only a triumph of diplomacy and trade but also a reflection of Hatshepsut's broader vision for her reign. By focusing on peaceful means of acquiring wealth and resources, Hatshepsut was able to maintain stability within Egypt while expanding its influence abroad. This approach set her apart from many of her predecessors, who had relied on military conquest to achieve similar goals. Instead, Hatshepsut's reign was marked by economic growth, trade partnerships, and a flourishing of culture and religion. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahari immortalized the expedition and ensured that future generations would remember this extraordinary achievement. The images of the Punt expedition are some of the most detailed and vivid depictions of foreign trade in ancient Egyptian art, and they remain a testament to Hatshepsut's vision as a ruler. The Punt reliefs not only celebrate the wealth and prosperity that the expedition brought to Egypt but also serve as a symbol of Hatshepsut's diplomatic acumen and her ability to forge peaceful, mutually beneficial relationships with distant lands. Hatshepsut's ability to re-establish Egypt's trade with Punt had far-reaching effects on the economy of Egypt. The wealth generated by this and other trade expeditions allowed her to fund her monumental building projects and further consolidate her power. In many ways, the success of the Punt expedition exemplified the stability, prosperity, and ingenuity that defined Hatshepsut's reign. It was a triumph of diplomacy, economics, and leadership, ensuring her place as one of Egypt's most successful and visionary pharaohs. Diplomatic successes and foreign policy. Hatshepsut's reign is often celebrated for its peaceful approach to foreign policy and diplomacy. Unlike many of her predecessors, who were known for their military campaigns and conquests, Hatshepsut prioritized maintaining stability and fostering peaceful relations with neighboring regions. This strategy not only strengthened Egypt's position in the region but also ensured continued economic prosperity during her reign. During Hatshepsut's time as pharaoh, Egypt was already a dominant power in the ancient world. The empire's influence extended across Nubia to the south and the Levant to the northeast, and Egypt enjoyed a network of trading partners that brought wealth and goods into the kingdom. Hatshepsut's approach to foreign policy was less focused on expansion and more concerned with securing Egypt's existing territories and maintaining favorable diplomatic relationships. Her ability to sustain peace allowed Egypt to flourish economically and culturally, as resources were devoted to trade, infrastructure, and religious activities rather than war. One of the key regions that required careful management during Hatshepsut's reign was Nubia, a territory that had long been under Egyptian influence. Nubia was a rich source of gold, precious stones, and other valuable resources, and maintaining control over this region was essential for Egypt's economy. Although Egypt had a military presence in Nubia, Hatshepsut preferred to maintain peaceful relations with the local Nubian leaders, ensuring that trade routes remained open and that Nubia continued to provide resources to Egypt without the need for military intervention. Hatshepsut's diplomatic skills extended beyond Nubia. She maintained strong ties with the rulers of neighboring city-states and kingdoms in the Levant, including those in Canaan and Syria. By fostering peaceful relations with these regions, Hatshepsut ensured that Egypt's northern borders were secure and the kingdom could continue to benefit from the flow of goods and tribute from these regions. The absence of large-scale military conflicts during her reign allowed Egypt to focus on internal development and economic growth, solidifying its position as one of the wealthiest and most powerful kingdoms of the ancient world. One of the most remarkable aspects of Hatshepsut's foreign policy was her emphasis on trade as a tool for diplomacy. Hatshepsut understood that Egypt's wealth was closely tied to its ability to engage in long-distance trade with other regions, and she worked to strengthen these trading relationships throughout her reign. The famous expedition to Punt, which we discussed earlier, was a prime example of her successful use of diplomacy to enhance Egypt's economy. Through trade, Hatshepsut was able to secure goods that were not available in Egypt, such as myrrh, incense, and exotic animals, which further enhanced her prestige and the kingdom's wealth. In addition to her efforts in Punt and Nubia, Hatshepsut maintained diplomatic relationships with other important trading partners, including the city-states of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Aegean Islands. These regions were vital for the exchange of goods such as wine, olive oil, copper, and tin, which were necessary for Egypt's economy and military. The peaceful exchange of these goods helped Egypt thrive during Hatshepsut's reign, and her skillful diplomacy ensured that Egypt's trading relationships remained strong and mutually beneficial. Hatshepsut's foreign policy was also shaped by her religious beliefs and the concept of Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian principle of balance, justice, and cosmic order. As pharaoh, it was Hatshepsut's duty to maintain Ma'at not only within Egypt but also in her interactions with other nations. This emphasis on maintaining harmony and order was reflected in her diplomatic approach, as she sought to avoid unnecessary conflict and instead focus on peaceful solutions that benefited both Egypt and its neighbors. Her ability to maintain peace allowed her to devote more attention and resources to domestic projects, such as her monumental building campaigns and religious offerings to the gods. Hatshepsut's reign stands out as a period of relative peace and prosperity in Egypt's long history. While other pharaohs are often remembered for their military conquests, Hatshepsut's legacy is one of diplomacy, trade, and cultural flourishing. Her foreign policy helped secure Egypt's borders, fostered economic growth, and strengthened the kingdom's influence through peaceful means. By focusing on trade and diplomacy, Hatshepsut ensured that Egypt remained a dominant power in the region without the need for costly and destructive wars. Her ability to maintain peace and stability through diplomacy allowed Egypt to thrive during her reign, and the wealth generated from trade was used to fund her ambitious building projects and religious endeavors. Hatshepsut's diplomatic successes stand as a testament to her wisdom and foresight as a ruler, and they contributed to the overall prosperity of Egypt during her reign. Hatshepsut's emphasis on diplomacy and trade over military conquest left a lasting impact on Egypt. Her reign became a model for future rulers who sought to govern through peace and stability rather than war. By securing Egypt's position in the world through diplomacy, Hatshepsut not only preserved the kingdom's wealth and power, but also left a legacy of wise and compassionate leadership that resonated long after her death. The later years and transfer of power. As Hatshepsut's reign progressed, Egypt continued to enjoy the prosperity and stability that had defined much of her time as pharaoh. By now, Hatshepsut had successfully established herself as one of the most powerful rulers of her time, solidifying her place in history through monumental building projects, successful trade expeditions, and diplomatic accomplishments. However, like all rulers, her reign eventually had to come to an end. In the later years of her reign, the dynamics of power within the royal court began to shift, and the slow transfer of authority to her stepson, Thutmose III, began. Thutmose III had spent the majority of his youth in the shadow of Hatshepsut's reign. Although he was officially co-regent with her from a young age, he had not been given much power or responsibility. Instead, he was raised within the royal court, likely receiving military training and education while Hatshepsut ruled Egypt with a firm hand. However, as Thutmose III grew older, it became clear that he was poised to take a more active role in the leadership of Egypt. Hatshepsut was no longer a young woman, and the realities of aging began to make it necessary for her to consider the future of Egypt after her reign. Thutmose III, now an experienced young man, was ready to assume greater responsibilities. Hatshepsut's decision to gradually hand over power to him was a calculated move. It allowed for a smooth transition and ensured that Egypt would continue to be ruled by the same dynasty, avoiding potential conflicts or instability. During the final years of Hatshepsut's reign, Thutmose III began to take on a more prominent role in military and governmental affairs. His upbringing had prepared him well for the responsibilities of kingship, and he began to oversee military campaigns that expanded Egypt's influence in the Near East. These campaigns were successful, and Thutmose III quickly earned a reputation as a skilled and capable military leader. Despite his growing power, Thutmose III remained loyal to Hatshepsut, and there is no evidence of any conflict or tension between them during this period of transition. The transfer of power was not abrupt, but rather a gradual process. Hatshepsut continued to rule Egypt in her later years, but Thutmose III's increasing involvement in military and administrative affairs marked the beginning of his reign as the primary leader of Egypt. Hatshepsut, known for her wisdom and careful governance, likely saw the benefit of allowing Thutmose III to gain experience and authority while she was still alive. This approach ensured that Egypt would continue to be stable and prosperous even after she was no longer on the throne. Hatshepsut's final years were not marked by major upheavals or conflicts. Instead, she maintained the steady governance that had defined much of her reign, overseeing the continued prosperity of Egypt. Her monumental building projects, such as her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, were nearing completion, and her legacy as one of Egypt's great builders was firmly established. The success of the Punt expedition and her diplomatic achievements had enriched Egypt's coffers, allowing for the continuation of large-scale construction and religious offerings. Despite the gradual transfer of power to Thutmose III, Hatshepsut remained the undisputed ruler of Egypt until her death. The exact circumstances of her death remain a mystery, as ancient sources do not provide a clear account. It is believed that she died around 1458 BCE, after ruling Egypt for about 22 years. Hatshepsut was likely in her 50s or 60s at the time of her death, and she was buried in the Valley of the Kings, the traditional resting place of Egypt's rulers. Her tomb, though not as grand as her mortuary temple, was a fitting resting place for a pharaoh who had left such a lasting impact on Egypt. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III officially became the sole ruler of Egypt. His reign, which would last for more than 3 decades, was marked by significant military conquests and the further expansion of Egypt's empire. Thutmose III's military campaigns earned him the title of the Napoleon of Egypt, as he led Egypt to the height of its territorial power. Despite his own achievements, Thutmose III's early reign was undeniably shaped by the stability and prosperity that Hatshepsut had established during her time as pharaoh. However, Thutmose III's relationship with Hatshepsut's legacy took a complex turn after her death. In the later years of his reign, there was an effort to erase Hatshepsut's memory from the historical record. Her name and images were chiseled off monuments, her statues were defaced, and many references to her reign were removed. This act of erasure was likely an attempt by Thutmose III to solidify his own legacy and present his reign as the uninterrupted continuation of his father's line. The exact reasons for this campaign against Hatshepsut's memory are still debated by historians, but it is clear that Thutmose III sought to downplay her role in Egyptian history. Despite these efforts to erase her from history, Hatshepsut's legacy endured. The grandeur of her building projects, particularly the temple at Deir el-Bahari, ensured that her memory would not be forgotten. Her reign as a powerful and capable female pharaoh remains one of the most remarkable periods in ancient Egyptian history, and her contributions to the stability, wealth, and culture of Egypt continue to be celebrated today. Death and legacy. Hatshepsut passed away around 1458 BCE, after a reign that lasted approximately 22 years. Her death marked the end of one of the most remarkable periods in ancient Egyptian history. While the precise cause of her death remains uncertain, it is believed that she may have succumbed to natural causes, possibly related to her advanced age, which was estimated to be in her 50s or 60s at the time of her death. Some studies of her mummy suggest that she may have suffered from ailments such as diabetes or cancer, but the exact circumstances are unclear. Upon her death, Hatshepsut was buried in the Valley of the Kings, the sacred burial ground of Egypt's rulers. Her tomb, originally built for her father, Thutmose I, was adapted to accommodate her remains. This was significant, as the Valley of the Kings was typically reserved for male pharaohs. By choosing to be buried in this prestigious location, Hatshepsut ensured that she would be remembered alongside Egypt's great kings, reinforcing her identity as a legitimate pharaoh. Despite the care she took to secure her legacy during her lifetime, Hatshepsut's memory would soon face challenges after her death. Thutmose III, who had now fully assumed power, embarked on a campaign to erase Hatshepsut's name and image from history. Statues of Hatshepsut were defaced, and her name was removed from inscriptions and monuments. This act of damnatio memoriae, or the condemnation of memory, was an attempt to erase her from Egypt's official records and present a continuous line of male pharaohs. There are several theories as to why Thutmose III undertook this effort to erase Hatshepsut's legacy. Some historians believe that it was a political move aimed at reinforcing the idea that male succession was the norm and that Hatshepsut's reign was an anomaly. Others speculate that Thutmose III, once he became a highly successful military ruler, may have wanted to establish his own legacy without the shadow of Hatshepsut's reign. Regardless of the motivations, the campaign to erase Hatshepsut's memory was largely successful for centuries, as her name was omitted from official king lists and her contributions were largely forgotten in the historical record. However, despite these efforts, Hatshepsut's legacy could not be fully erased. Many of the monuments and temples she built, particularly the magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, stood the test of time and ensured that her story would eventually be rediscovered. In the 19th century, archaeologists began to uncover evidence of her reign, and by the early 20th century, Hatshepsut's achievements were being studied and celebrated once again. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari remains one of the most stunning architectural achievements of ancient Egypt. The temple's terraces, colonnades, and detailed reliefs tell the story of her reign, immortalizing her in stone. The temple's prominence, combined with other surviving monuments and inscriptions, allowed modern scholars to piece together the story of her life and reign, revealing her as one of the most successful and innovative rulers of ancient Egypt. In addition to her architectural achievements, Hatshepsut's reign is remembered for its peaceful diplomacy, economic prosperity, and emphasis on trade. Her successful expedition to Punt brought wealth and exotic goods to Egypt, and her focus on building projects left an indelible mark on the landscape. Her reign stands in contrast to those of other pharaohs, many of whom are remembered for their military conquests. Hatshepsut's reign, by comparison, is often seen as a golden age of stability, cultural flourishing, and economic growth. Hatshepsut's legacy is also significant for its impact on the perception of female leadership in ancient Egypt. By declaring herself pharaoh and ruling as a king in her own right, Hatshepsut challenged the gender norms of her time. Her ability to maintain power for over 2 decades, despite being a woman in a male-dominated society, is a testament to her political acumen, intelligence, and leadership skills. While there were other powerful queens in Egyptian history, Hatshepsut stands out as one of the few women who ruled Egypt as a full-fledged pharaoh. Today, Hatshepsut is celebrated as one of the greatest female rulers in history. Her achievements continue to inspire scholars and historians, and her story serves as a reminder of the complexities of power, gender, and legacy in ancient Egypt. Despite attempts to erase her from history, Hatshepsut's name and accomplishments have endured, cementing her place among the most influential figures of the ancient world. Hatshepsut's story is not only a story of power and leadership, but also one of resilience. Even after her death, the monuments she left behind spoke for her, ensuring that her reign would not be forgotten. Her life, marked by bold decisions and leadership, remains a testament to the enduring power of legacy, a legacy that continues to resonate through the ages. In this video, we took a deep dive into the extraordinary life and reign of Hatshepsut, one of ancient Egypt's most remarkable and influential rulers. From her rise to power as regent, to her bold declaration as pharaoh, and her lasting achievements in diplomacy, architecture, and trade, Hatshepsut's reign marked a golden age of peace and prosperity for Egypt. We explored her impressive building projects, including the stunning temple at Deir el-Bahari, and discussed her famous expedition to Punt, which brought wealth and prestige to the kingdom. Despite attempts to erase her from history, Hatshepsut's legacy endures as one of the greatest female pharaohs. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Hatshepsut's fascinating life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new ASMR history story. I look forward to whispering more tales from the past to you soon. Until next time, take care and stay curious.